So are you giving birth or not? Because I'll throw you out of my house, my mother-in-law Karen snapped, her face flushed crimson as she stood in my hospital room doorway, hands on her hips like she was about to physically evict me from the maternity ward. The nurse beside me actually gasped. I remember staring at her, 9 months pregnant, in active labor, contractions hitting every 3 minutes, and thinking, how did we get here? How did my life become this? That's where this story needs to start, I guess. Not with that moment. That's where it all exploded. I need to back up. Way back. 3 years earlier, I was Jennifer Martinez, 32, married to Brandon for 6 years, living in a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in Westchester County, with a mortgage that made sense on our combined income. Brandon worked in fintech. I was a marketing director at a mid-sized tech firm downtown. We had the kind of life people see on Instagram and think, that's the goal right there. Matching his and hers coffee mugs on Sunday mornings, weekend trips to the Hamptons, a golden retriever named Cooper. Our friends envied us. I could see it in their eyes when they visited. The thing about a perfect life is that it makes you complacent. You stop asking questions because everything feels right. You don't notice the small cracks until there's spider webbing across the whole foundation. Brandon's mom, Karen, had always been present. That's the diplomatic word. She'd been divorced twice, lived 40 minutes away in a smaller house she'd bought after settlement number 2, and had a habit of calling at 7 a.m. on Saturdays to ask if we wanted her to bring over a casserole. Brandon was an only child. His father had left when he was 2, so Karen had always been his entire world. I'd made peace with that years ago. Or I thought I had. "Jennifer, honey, that shade of blue on the guest bedroom is too bold," she'd say, standing in my kitchen with her arms crossed. "Let me know if you want me to recommend someone who actually understands feng shui." Or, "Brandon mentioned you're trying to get pregnant. My nutritionist says you should really cut out dairy. I'll send you her number. She's very expensive, but worth it." Brandon would always laugh it off. "That's just Mom," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "She means well." And I'd nod and smile because he was right. She was just being Karen. Overbearing, maybe, but not malicious. Not yet. The real shift started in late 2021. Brandon's company was acquired by a larger firm, and his stock options suddenly vested at a much higher valuation. We're talking $1.4 million net after taxes. Not life-changing enough to retire, but enough that we could breathe. Enough that we could think about finally starting a family without doing the math every time we looked at our savings account. Karen found out about the money during a family dinner at our place. Brandon mentioned it casually, something about being comfortable now, and I watched her entire demeanor shift. It was subtle, but it was there. A tightness around her mouth. Her eyes went sharper. "Well," she said, setting down her wine glass with a clink that sounded louder than it probably was, "I suppose that's good news for you both." "It is," I said, reaching over to squeeze Brandon's hand. "We're thinking about starting to try for a baby next year." Karen's expression froze. "Next year?" She turned to Brandon. "You're not getting any younger either, you know. And Jennifer, with your career hours, I worry about how you'd manage maternity leave financially, unless you're planning to stop working." "I'm not planning to stop working," I said, keeping my voice light. "We'll figure it out. People do every day." "People don't have careers like Brandon's," she replied, and there was something in her tone, a possessiveness, that made the back of my neck prickle. I remember excusing myself to get dessert from the kitchen, and Brandon followed me. "She's being weird," I whispered. "She's always like this with big announcements," he said, but even he sounded uncertain. "Give her time to process." Processing, as it turned out, meant Karen becoming even more involved in our lives. She'd call with names of fertility doctors. She'd drop by unannounced to help with organizing the nursery, which didn't exist yet. She'd make comments about my drinking wine at dinners, my stress levels, my BMI, my work-life balance. Each comment felt like a grain of sand, individually small, but accumulating into something that made me itch. Then came the moment that should have been my warning. I was pregnant, finally, after 8 months of trying. I'd taken the test on a Thursday morning and called Brandon immediately, crying happy tears in our master bathroom. We decided to tell our families in person the following Sunday at dinner. I'd made reservations at this nice Italian place in Greenwich where we could all celebrate together. I never made it to that dinner. Karen called Brandon Friday night. I only know what happened because I heard him on the phone in his office, voice rising in a way I'd never heard before. "Mom, what do you mean you're not feeling well? We're telling everyone tomorrow. No, I'm not pushing back the announcement. Because Jennifer's been waiting for this moment and, Mom, that's manipulative. No, I don't appreciate that. Yes, I know your back is bothering you, but..." He hung up, came back to bed, didn't say anything. Saturday morning, he got the call. Karen had thrown out her back and was possibly going to the ER. We postponed the dinner. By Sunday, she was fine, completely fine, and called to ask why we hadn't rescheduled yet. Brandon made a reservation for the following Friday. At that Friday dinner, before I could even order my sparkling water instead of wine as a hint, Karen announced that she'd already figured out we were pregnant. "You ordered water," she said, smiling like she'd solved a murder, "and your face has that glow. I've been around enough pregnancies to know. So when were you planning to tell me? Or was I going to find out from Facebook like everyone else?" The pregnancy should have been joyful. It wasn't. Karen had opinions about everything. My OBGYN wasn't the right one. She had a recommendation. My prenatal vitamins weren't the right brand. I shouldn't be working such long hours. I shouldn't be exercising. I should be eating more, but not that kind of food. The nursery theme I'd chosen was too trendy and won't age well. And Brandon, my sweet, conflict-averse Brandon, would just agree with her, or not disagree loudly enough. "She's just excited," he'd say. "Let her help, it makes her happy." But I could feel something shifting between us. He was distant in a way he hadn't been before. He'd stay late at work. He'd spend long stretches on his phone without telling me who he was texting. When I'd ask, he'd say it was work stuff, but his jaw would clench in a way that told me he was lying. By my 7th month, I was exhausted. Physically, yes, but also emotionally drained from the constant undermining. My mother flew in from Florida to help, and within 2 hours of her arrival, she pulled me aside. "Honey, is everything okay with you and Brandon? He seems checked out." "He's fine," I said automatically. "He's just stressed about work and becoming a father." But he wasn't fine, and neither was I. The night before I went into labor, Karen called the house. At 10:47 p.m., I remember checking, and asked to speak to Brandon. I could hear her voice through the phone, high and urgent. He went into his office and closed the door. When he came back 20 minutes later, he looked like he'd aged a decade. "Your mom's coming to the hospital tomorrow," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a resignation. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She wants to be there when the baby comes." I didn't argue. I was too tired. I was also in labor, and I couldn't afford the emotional energy of a fight. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know for another 4 hours, was that Karen had called with an ultimatum. One that Brandon had agreed to without telling me. One that would change everything. The ultrasound technician's eyes went wide when Karen walked in behind Brandon and me. She'd been waiting in the lobby. Waiting, I'd later realize, for the exact moment my water broke, because Brandon had texted her the second it happened. No discussion. No, should we tell my mom? Just a text. It's happening. By the time we got to the hospital, Karen was already in the maternity ward's waiting area, wearing fresh makeup and holding flowers she'd apparently grabbed from a 24-hour grocery store. She looked like she was arriving at a cocktail party, not a birth. "Jennifer, you look terrible," she said as a nurse helped me into a gown. "Have you been sleeping? You should really try to relax. Stress isn't good for the baby." I didn't respond. I couldn't. A contraction hit, and I gripped the bed rail hard enough that my knuckles turned white. The nurse, her name tag said Monica, shot Karen a look that could have melted steel. "Ma'am, maybe you'd like to wait in the—" "I'm the grandmother," Karen interrupted. "I'm staying." "She's the mother-in-law," I gasped between breaths. Monica's expression shifted, not quite sympathy, but recognition. She'd clearly seen this before. "You can stay in the room, but you need to be supportive and quiet. Those are the rules." Karen sat in the corner chair, arms crossed, looking offended that there were rules at all. 12 hours of labor. 12 hours of Karen commenting on everything. My pain tolerance, my breathing technique, the epidural I chose. So many women do it naturally these days. The fetal monitor readings. That heart rate seems high, doesn't it? When the doctor came in to check my progress, Karen asked her directly, in front of me, if she thought I was emotionally equipped to handle motherhood given my career stress. The doctor, a woman named Dr. Patel with the patience of a saint, said, "The patient is doing great. That's what matters." But by hour 14, I was exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. I was exhausted by the presence of Karen's judgment, her ownership, her need to be central to this moment that was supposed to be mine. Brandon had left to get coffee around hour 9. He came back looking sheepish, and when I asked where he'd been for so long, he didn't answer directly. Later, I'd find out he'd been on the phone with his mother in the hospital cafeteria, discussing, and I'm not making this up, the terms of her involvement in our child's life. The terms, like we were negotiating a business contract. At 3:47 a.m. on October 15th, after 36 hours of labor, my daughter was born. Lily, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect. The moment they placed her on my chest, everything else, Karen, Brandon, the exhaustion, the pain, it all fell away. I was staring at my daughter's face, and I was crying so hard I couldn't see clearly. "She has Brandon's nose," Karen announced from her corner, already on her feet. "And your mouth. Lucky her." I didn't laugh. Monica helped me with skin-to-skin contact, showing me how to position Lily for feeding. She was kind and professional, and completely aware that I needed to bond with my daughter without an audience. But Karen wasn't leaving. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. "Don't put her on social media," I said quietly. "I'm just capturing the moment," Karen replied, snapping another photo. "Grandma's prerogative." That's when something inside me snapped. Not the exhausted, vulnerable part of me, the part that had been quietly, methodically watching Karen's behavior for months, the part that realized in that moment that I had made a catastrophic mistake. I looked at Brandon. He was standing by the window looking at his phone, not looking at me, not looking at Lily, looking at his phone. "Brandon," I said. My voice was steady, which surprised me. "Get your mother out of this room, now." "Jennifer, now, or I will call the nurse and tell her that you're both making me uncomfortable during a medical procedure." Karen's face flushed. "Well, I've never been spoken to like that in my—" "I don't care," I said. I meant it. "Get out." Brandon looked torn between two women, and I watched the exact moment he chose. He didn't choose me. He turned to his mother. "Come on, Mom, let's let Jennifer rest. We can see her in a few hours." "But I just got here." "Mom." Something in his tone made her move. She gathered her purse, her jacket, her phone full of pictures. She paused at the door like she wanted to say something cutting, but Monica, beautiful, magnificent Monica, was already ushering her out. When they were gone, I looked at my daughter. She had her eyes open, looking at me with that unfocused, newborn gaze. She didn't know yet that her father's mother had already tried to claim her, that she'd already started the process of making my daughter hers instead of mine. "It's okay," I whispered to Lily, though I didn't know if I was lying. "It's going to be okay." Brandon came back an hour later with coffee and the expression of a man who'd been given very specific instructions. "We need to talk about living arrangements," he said, sitting in the chair Karen had vacated. "My mom thinks it would be really helpful if she moved in with us for the first few weeks, just to help with the baby. She's already talked to her work about taking time off." I stared at him. "No. Jennifer, no, absolutely not. She will not be moving into our house. She just wants to help. She wants to control," I said. "There's a difference, and you know it." He looked away, and that's when I saw it clearly for the first time. Brandon wasn't choosing his mother because he was weak. He was choosing her because, on some level, he'd already decided that I was the problem, that my resistance to his mother's involvement was unreasonable, that I was the difficult one. Karen had spent months, maybe longer, working on him, planting seeds, reframing her behavior as help and my boundaries as selfishness. "My mother is not moving in," I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "If she shows up at that house, I will have her removed." "You can't talk about my mother that way." "I can, and I will." I looked at our newborn daughter, then back at my husband. "I gave birth 30 minutes ago, Brandon, and you're arguing with me about your mother. Do you understand how that looks?" He did. I could see it in his face. He understood exactly how that looked. But understanding and changing course were two different things. That was the first sign that my marriage was already over. The second sign came 48 hours later, when I was discharged from the hospital. Karen was waiting in the lobby. Not the waiting room, the lobby, like she'd claimed the entire hospital as her territory. "I'll take the baby," she said, reaching for Lily in her car seat. "You go rest. You look exhausted." "I'm taking my daughter to my car," I said. "Our daughter," Karen corrected. Monica, who'd come to discharge me, actually made a sound, a small cough that might have been suppressed laughter or rage. "That's not... She's my daughter," I said carefully. "She's Brandon's daughter, which makes her my granddaughter, which means she's family, my family, and I'm going to be very involved in her life." Karen smiled, and I realized with horror that she thought this was a warm, bonding moment, that she was being generous. "I'm thinking I'll take her 3 days a week so you can work, unless you're planning to be a real mother and stay home." The implication that working made me not a real mother hung in the air between us. "Brandon and I will discuss childcare arrangements," I said. "You won't be making any decisions." Karen's smile tightened. "We'll see what Brandon says." And there it was, the real threat. Not that she'd be involved in Lily's life, that she'd positioned herself as the tiebreaker in my marriage, that she'd already won Brandon's loyalty, and now it was just a matter of time before he chose her completely. I should have fought harder then. I should have insisted on couples therapy, on boundaries, on something. But I was 3 days postpartum, my hormones were in free fall, and I was holding a newborn that smelled like hope and baby shampoo. I was too tired to fight the war I suddenly realized I was in. The next 3 months were a slow-motion nightmare. Karen was at the house constantly. She'd let herself in using the key Brandon had given her, a key he'd given her without asking me. She'd reorganize the nursery when I wasn't looking. She'd contradict my parenting decisions in front of Brandon. She'd take Lily for hours without asking, just announcing that she was stealing her grandbaby for a bit. I'd come home from maternity leave to find her holding Lily, both of them on the couch, and Karen would say things like, "She was crying for me. She knows I'm her real mother figure. Babies are so intuitive." Brandon started working longer hours. Or he said he was working longer hours. I'd find credit card charges for restaurants I'd never been to, hotels 2 towns over, bars in the city. When I asked about them, he'd say it was client entertainment, business meals, that I was being paranoid. But the truth was simpler and worse. He was avoiding home, avoiding me, avoiding the mess that his mother had created and that he refused to acknowledge. My own mother called one afternoon in December, 4 weeks before the ultimatum that would blow everything open. "Jennifer, honey, what's going on with you? You sound..." "I'm fine," I lied. "You don't sound fine. Is Brandon being good to you?" I almost told her. I almost said, "His mother is in my house, in my marriage, in my daughter's life, and he's letting it happen. He's choosing it. And I don't know how to fight it because he won't even admit it's a fight." Instead, I said, "It's just the postpartum hormones. Everyone says it gets better." "It does," my mother said gently, "but not if something else is wrong." She was right. It wasn't getting better because the actual problem, Brandon's inability to set boundaries with his mother, his willingness to let her dictate the terms of our family, was getting worse. By January, I was barely speaking to my husband. We'd sleep in the same bed, but not touch. We'd eat dinner together, but not make eye contact. When Karen came over, which was 5 days a week now, I'd take Lily upstairs to her room and close the door. That's where I was when Brandon finally said it. January 14th. Lily was 4 months old, sleeping in her crib, and I was sitting on the floor of her nursery scrolling through my phone, avoiding going downstairs where Karen was reorganizing my kitchen cabinets. Brandon knocked softly on the doorframe. "Can we talk?" We went into our bedroom and closed the door. He looked terrible, thin, pale, like a man who hadn't slept properly in months. "My mom wants to move in," he said without preamble. "Permanently. She's thinking about selling her house and using the money to help us renovate the kitchen. She'd have her own wing, her own entrance." I stared at him. "No. Just hear me out. No. Brandon, no. Absolutely not. I will not live with your mother." "She's trying to help. She wants to be more involved with Lily. She thinks—" "I don't care what she thinks. I don't want her in this house. I don't want her in my marriage. And I don't want her near my daughter any more than she already is." He flinched at the word "my," like I'd slapped him. "Lily is our daughter," he said quietly. "Then start acting like it. Set a boundary. Tell your mother no. Tell her that she cannot move in. Tell her that she cannot reorganize my kitchen, or contradict my parenting, or let herself into our house whenever she feels like it. She's my mother, and I'm your wife, or I was. I'm starting to think you forgot that." The silence that followed was deafening. He didn't deny it. He didn't say, "That's not true." He just looked at me with sad, guilty eyes, and I knew. I knew he'd been pulled so far into his mother's orbit that there wasn't room for me anymore. "I think we need to separate," I said. The words came out calm and clear, like they'd been waiting to be said for months. "I think you need to figure out what you actually want, because right now, you can't choose between your mother and your wife, and I'm not going to keep waiting for you to figure it out." He didn't argue. That was the saddest part. He didn't fight for us. He just nodded like I'd confirmed something he'd already known. That night, I called a divorce attorney. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she came highly recommended by a friend of mine from work. I met with her the next day at her office in downtown New Rochelle. "Tell me everything," she said, and I did. I told her about Karen's behavior, the comments, the boundary violations. I told her about Brandon choosing his mother over his wife. I told her about the money, the $1.4 million that suddenly made me wonder if Brandon was trying to buy his mother's approval, or if his mother was trying to position herself to take some of it. "We're going to need documentation," Margaret said, making notes. "Texts, emails, anything that shows a pattern of the mother-in-law's interference and the husband's passivity or active participation in it." "I have texts," I said. "Lots of them." "Good. And does he have any agreement with his mother about money?" "Not that I know of, but she's talking about selling her house to help us renovate our kitchen, which is insane. We don't need our kitchen renovated." Margaret's pen paused. "Has he agreed to this?" "Not officially, but he didn't say no either." "That's important. Has he made any large purchases or transferred any money since you gave birth?" I pulled up our bank statements on my phone. Brandon handled a lot of the finances, but I had access. My eyes scanned the recent transactions, and there, $50,000 transferred to a joint account with Karen's name on it, dated 3 weeks ago. "What is this?" I whispered. "That," Margaret said grimly, "is evidence that your husband is liquidating marital assets without your consent, and that's a problem." Over the next 6 weeks, I gathered everything. I hired a family law investigator who found that Karen had been pressuring Brandon to put her on the deed to our house. Not immediately, she was smarter than that, but she was positioning herself, building a financial case for why she should be invested in the family property. There were text message chains between them discussing me, dozens of them. Karen telling Brandon that I was too career-focused, that I was neglecting the baby, that I was making his life difficult. Brandon responding with things like, "I know, Mom," and "She doesn't understand," and, most damning, "I'm thinking about leaving her." Margaret read them with the expression of someone who'd seen this play out 100 times before. "He's been emotionally checked out for months," she said, "and his mother has been actively pushing him toward separation. This is actually helpful for your case, Jennifer. This shows a pattern of undue influence and financial manipulation." The custody question was harder. I wanted full custody of Lily, but Margaret was realistic. He's the father. He has rights. But given the mother-in-law situation, we can argue for primary custody with you, and we can restrict unsupervised visits between Lily and the grandmother. I nodded, but it felt hollow. I didn't want to keep Lily from her father. I wanted her father to be the man I thought I'd married, the man who would protect us from his mother's invasiveness, not enable it. On February 20th, Brandon moved out. He rented an apartment in Scarsdale, about 20 minutes away. He came by to see Lily on Sundays. Karen came with him, every single time. I didn't object to it formally, but I documented it. Every visit, every inappropriate comment Karen made, every time she tried to give Lily advice about feeding, sleeping, development. Every time she'd say things like, "When you're with Daddy and Grandma next weekend, we're going to have so much fun. Better than boring Mommy's house, right?" Margaret was building a case. Not against Brandon, not directly, but against Karen's undue influence and her attempts to alienate Lily from me. The divorce was finalized in July, 18 months after Lily was born. 18 months after the moment Karen stood in my hospital room and threatened to throw me out of the house for not birthing fast enough. Brandon got 40% custody. I got the house. We split the remaining liquid assets, which meant my half was $700,000 after legal fees and taxes. The $50,000 he'd transferred to Karen was classified as a gift. His lawyer fought hard on that one. But Margaret managed to characterize it as gifts to third parties during marital dissolution, which looked bad for him in the eyes of the judge. Karen was furious. According to Brandon, she'd screamed at him about how I'd poisoned the court against her, how I was keeping his daughter from him, how I was a selfish bitch who didn't deserve the house. I know this because Brandon told me during one of his Sunday pickups. He said it while looking at his shoes, like he was ashamed. But not ashamed enough to actually defend me to his mother, not ashamed enough to set any boundaries. The real reckoning came 6 months later. I was dating someone by then, a guy named Michael, a divorced father of 2 who understood the particular hell of in-law drama. He was kind to Lily, respectful of boundaries, and he'd actually met my mother and gotten her approval, which was a bar I was now apparently measuring men against. Michael was at the house one Saturday afternoon in January, almost 2 years after Lily's birth, when Karen showed up, unannounced, without Brandon. That was new. "I need to talk to you," she said, standing on my porch in a coat that probably cost more than my car payment, "about Lily's future." "Lily's future is with me," I said, "and with her father, in the time he's allocated by the custody agreement, not with you." "You're being so short-sighted," Karen said. "Do you know how much I have in my will for Lily? Do you know that I've set up a trust fund? Do you understand that I'm going to be more involved in her life than you are, eventually?" Michael appeared behind me in the doorway. "Jennifer, who is this?" "This is my ex-husband's mother," I said. "Karen, you need to leave." "I'm not leaving until we talk about—" "No," I said, "we don't talk. We're not in a relationship. You're Lily's grandmother, that's it. You get supervised time with her when her father is present, and that's all the relationship you're going to have with me. Now please leave my property." Karen's face went that particular shade of red that I'd come to recognize as rage barely contained. "You're going to regret this," she said. "You're going to regret keeping Lily away from her real family, and when she's older, when she asks why Grandma wasn't allowed to see her, you're going to have to explain that her mother was selfish and vindictive." "My daughter will know the truth," I said, "and the truth is that you tried to destroy her family so you could control her father. And when that didn't work, you tried to threaten me with your money and your will. So no, I don't think I'll regret anything." Karen turned and walked back to her car. But before she left, she rolled down the window. "You think you've won," she called out, "but Brandon will always be mine, and Lily will know that. She'll grow up knowing that Mommy took her away from Grandma." I watched her drive away. Michael put his hand on my back. "That was intense," he said. "That was the last conversation I'm ever going to have with that woman," I replied. And it was, because 3 weeks later, I got a call from Brandon. Karen had suffered a stroke, severe. She was in the hospital, unresponsive. I felt nothing. No sadness, no sympathy, No complicated mix of emotions. Just a flat, empty space where I might have been expected to feel something. She died 3 days later without regaining consciousness. Brandon called me to tell me. His voice was hollow. "There's a funeral," he said. "Lily should probably be there." "Lily is 3 years old," I said. "She doesn't need to go to a funeral. You can explain that Grandma died, and that's enough." "My mother—" "Your mother is dead, Brandon, and I'm sorry for your loss. I really am. But I'm not going to traumatize my daughter just so you can process your grief publicly." He didn't argue. He never argued anymore. The funeral happened on a Tuesday. Brandon went. I kept Lily home and we planted flowers in the garden. I didn't tell her that her grandmother had died. She was too young to understand. I just let her dig in the dirt and play, and I sat on the porch and felt the weight of something finally lifting. 2 months later, Brandon called again. He wanted to talk about his life, about how empty he felt, about how he'd realized, too late, that his mother had been the problem all along, about how he wished he'd listened to me. "I don't want to hear this," I said gently. "I'm glad you figured it out, but I'm not the person to process this with. Get a therapist." "Jennifer." "I have to go. Michael's taking me and Lily to the park." I hung up. I didn't feel cruel about it. I felt free. That was 4 years ago. Lily is 7 now. She knows that her father loved his mother very much, and that made him sad sometimes. She knows that I love her more than I could ever love anyone else. She knows that sometimes people make choices that hurt the people around them, but that doesn't make those people bad. I'm married to Michael now. We have a son, James, who's 2. Brandon is in Lily's life. He has her every other weekend and 2 weeks in the summer. He's a better father than he was a husband. He set boundaries with the memory of his mother that he never could with her in life. Sometimes I wonder if Karen would have approved of my new family if she were alive, if she would have found some way to undermine me, or if grief might have softened her. But mostly I don't think about her at all. What I think about is that moment in the hospital when she stood in the doorway and told me to hurry up with the birth. What I think about is how close I came to spending the rest of my life trying to shrink myself small enough to fit in the space she left for me. How close I came to teaching my daughter that a woman's needs don't matter as much as keeping the peace. I didn't teach her that, and that's the real victory.